The summer sun had baked the Wyoming earth into a hard, cracked skin, and the Hayes ranch was beginning to die beneath it. Clara had grown up among the smell of sage and the creak of windmills, but lately even the wind seemed tired. Her father's cough echoed through the quiet house, and her mother's hands trembled when she counted the feed sacks. When the last of the wells ran dry, Clara made the decision no one else could bear to make. She took the job at the McCrae estate. The McCraes were known across 3 counties, wealthy cattlemen with miles of green pasture that never seemed to feel the drought. The drive there took most of the morning. By the time she arrived, the horizon shimmered like glass, and her throat ached from dust. The main house rose from the land like something out of a different world: wide porches, clean fences, and horses with coats that gleamed like polished leather. Luke McCrae met her in the stables. He wasn't what she expected. Older than her by a few years, he carried himself with the lazy confidence of someone who had never been told no. He tipped his hat and offered her a canteen of water. His eyes, a deep storm gray, seemed to study her for a moment longer than politeness allowed. "You're the Hayes girl?" he asked. "Yes, sir," she said, though the word, sir, tasted awkward in her mouth. "You know horses." "I know enough to work." He smiled then, a small thing, but it made her chest feel tight. "We'll see about that." The days that followed were long and honest. Clara rose before dawn, brushing the dust from her boots and tying her braid tight before heading out to the corrals. Luke was often there before her, working alongside the hands though he didn't need to. He moved with an easy strength, rope and reins like extensions of his arms. He never spoke much, but he watched her work, always quiet, always noticing. Sometimes he'd correct her grip on the bridle or steady her hand when a nervous colt shied away. His touch was brief, respectful, but it lingered in her memory afterward. The men teased her, called her the boss's favorite, and though she denied it, her cheeks would betray her. One evening, clouds rolled in from the west, black and low. She had just finished turning out the horses when the first crack of thunder split the air. Luke shouted from the far pen, "Get inside, Hayes." But she stayed, checking the latch one more time, stubborn as always. The rain came in sudden sheets, blinding. By the time Luke reached her, she was soaked through, hair plastered against her neck. He caught her arm and pulled her into the stable. The horses stamped and tossed their heads at the thunder, and for a moment it was just the two of them, breathless and dripping in the lantern's glow. "You trying to get yourself struck by lightning?" he said, half angry, half laughing. "I wasn't finished," she answered, though her voice trembled with more than cold. He looked at her then, really looked. The storm outside faded to a dull roar, but inside, everything felt alive and sharp. "You've got more courage than any man I've known," he said softly. Her heart pounded in her chest. No one had ever spoken to her like that before, not as a girl to be protected, but as someone equal, someone strong. She wanted to thank him, but the words caught somewhere deep in her throat. "Luke," she whispered. Just his name. It came out small, unsteady, but it filled the space between them like thunder rolling over the plains. He didn't move closer, but he didn't step away either. Outside, lightning flashed again, illuminating the lines of his face, the roughness of his jaw, the gentleness in his eyes. For a long moment, neither of them spoke. The world was only rain, breath, and the wild pulse of something new and frightening. When the storm finally passed, she stepped away, gathering her courage like a coat. "I should see to the foals," she said. He nodded once. "You're a good hand, Clara Hayes." She turned toward the stalls, pretending to be busy, but her hands trembled. She knew that something had changed, that the storm had left more than wet earth behind. And though her voice had quaked, her heart had spoken clearly. She was already halfway gone. The storm left the land smelling of sage and wet dust. For days afterward, the air carried that new, clean scent, and Clara could hardly pass the stables without thinking of how close Luke had stood that night. She tried to lose herself in work, mending tack, feeding foals, brushing down the geldings, but her thoughts wandered, betraying her at every quiet moment. Luke seemed changed too. He was still courteous, still careful, but there was a hesitation in him now, a weight in the way he looked at her across the yard. He spoke less than ever, and when he did, his voice held an edge that hadn't been there before. One afternoon, she found him fixing the fence along the southern pasture. The sun was high, and the air shimmered with heat. She offered to help, but he shook his head. "You don't need to be out here," he said. She wiped the sweat from her brow. If I can handle breaking colts, I can handle a few nails. He glanced at her, and for a heartbeat, the corner of his mouth lifted. You don't take orders easy, do you? No, sir, she said. Never saw the use in it. They worked side by side until the sun began to fall. Every so often, their hands brushed when they reached for the same hammer or length of wire. Each touch sent a small jolt through her, though she did her best to hide it. When the last board was set, she leaned against the post, breathing hard. Thank you, he said quietly. For what? For not being afraid of me. She blinked, caught off guard. Why would I be? He looked out over the field, his jaw tight. Most folks see the name McCrae and think it means something, power, money, whatever it is people chase. They talk to me like they're talking to a banknote, not a man. Clara folded her arms. Well, maybe they don't know you. You're not as hard as you want them to think. He turned then, and the way he looked at her made her stomach twist. You think you do. She wanted to say yes, but the words stayed trapped behind her teeth. Instead, she nodded once, barely. That night, she couldn't sleep. The big house loomed in the distance, its windows glowing faintly under the moonlight. She'd been invited once, Mrs. McCrae had insisted the ranch hands join supper, but Clara had declined. She didn't belong in rooms like that. Still, she wondered what it looked like inside, wondered what Luke looked like there among the polished wood and oil lamps instead of the dust and sunlight. A few evenings later, he asked her to come up to the house to help with a foaling mare that had been brought into the barn beside it. The animal was struggling, and they worked together well into the night. When the foal finally took its first shaky breath, Clara laughed with relief, wiping her hands on her skirt. Luke leaned against the stall door, watching her, the lamplight softening the hard lines of his face. You've got a gift, he said. You calm everything you touch. She smiled faintly. Sometimes. Not always. He stepped closer, not enough to startle her, but enough that she could see the silver in his eyes. You calm me, he said, voice low. The words hung between them, fragile and true. She felt her pulse quicken, her heart beating loud enough to drown the soft nickers of the horses. Luke, she began, but he shook his head slightly, as if to stop her. I'm not saying anything needs to happen, he said. I just needed you to know. She couldn't answer. Every thought tangled into silence. He reached out, brushed a strand of hay from her hair, his fingers barely grazing her cheek. It was the gentlest touch she had ever known. The moment stretched, full of things neither dared to say. Then one of the mares snorted, breaking the spell. Clara stepped back, her breath shaky. I should check the feed, she murmured, and hurried toward the door. Outside, the night air hit her like a wave. She pressed a hand to her chest, as if she could quiet the storm inside. Luke stayed behind in the barn, staring at the place she had stood. The great house waited beyond the hill, its grand bed and empty halls symbols of all he had but never wanted. He thought of Clara, of her stubborn courage, her trembling voice, her strength, and knew the truth he couldn't yet speak aloud. All his wealth meant nothing if she wasn't part of it. Dawn came soft and gold over the hills, the kind of light that made the world look almost new. Clara was already awake, her hands wrapped around a cup of coffee gone cold. The ranch had settled into a fragile peace after weeks of drought and labor, but her heart hadn't. Every time she saw Luke, something inside her pulled and ached in equal measure. Word had spread that the McCraes were planning to buy up another section of land that included her family's small homestead. Her father had been too proud to ask for help, but Clara knew what losing it would mean. That patch of earth held their history, the only home her parents had ever known. She tried to speak to Luke about it one morning, but before she could, his father arrived in the stables. Mr. McCrae was tall and sharp-eyed, a man built out of profit and expectation. He looked Clara over with a polite but distant nod. You've done good work here, Miss Hayes, he said. Luke tells me the horses have never been steadier. Thank you, sir. He smiled, thin and businesslike. We'll need that strength for the expansion. That Hayes land's a fine stretch, worth every dollar. Clara froze. Her voice barely came out. That's my family's land, Mr. McCrae didn't flinch. Then you know it's good ground. I'm sorry, but business is business. He tipped his hat and walked away, leaving silence behind him. Luke stood a few feet away, his expression unreadable. She turned on him, hurt flashing in her eyes. You knew. He hesitated. I heard my father talking about it, but I didn't think. You didn't think it mattered. Her words cracked like a whip. That's my home, Luke. My family's. You can't let him take it. He stepped closer, his voice rough. It's not my decision to make. She stared at him, her breath shaking. Then I guess you're not the man I thought you were. She left before he could answer, her boots kicking up dust as she went. That night, Luke sat alone in the big house, staring at the empty glass on the table. The silence pressed down on him harder than any burden he'd known. Every word Clara had said echoed in his head. Not the man I thought you were. For once, he couldn't hide behind his family's name or their money. He thought of Clara in the stables, her hands gentle on a frightened foal, her voice steady even when she was scared. She had more heart than anyone he'd ever met. And she was right, he had the power to stop this, if only he was willing to defy everything he'd been raised to protect. By morning, he'd made his choice. He rode out early, papers folded in his coat. When he reached the Hayes ranch, the yard was quiet except for the creak of the windmill. Clara's mother came to the porch, startled to see him, and called her daughter from inside. Clara stepped out, cautious. The sight of him there made something twist inside her, though she tried not to show it. I told my father I'm done, Luke said. I sold off part of my share. Used it to pay your family's debt. She blinked, stunned. You, what? He handed her the folded deed. It's yours. All of it. No one's taking it away. Her throat tightened. I can't accept this. You can, he said. Because it's not charity. It's what should have been right from the start. For a long moment, neither spoke. The wind moved through the tall grass, carrying the scent of rain and earth. Then she looked up at him, eyes shining with something fierce and tender. Why would you do this for me? She asked quietly. He took a breath, his voice unsteady for the first time she'd ever heard. Because I can't stand to see you lose what you love. Because somewhere between that first storm and today, you became my home too. The tears came before she could stop them. She stepped closer, her hand trembling as it found his. You don't have to say anything else, she whispered. Just stay. He nodded, the smallest smile touching his lips. I was hoping you'd say that. They stood there as the sun rose higher, painting the ranch in gold. The land stretched wide and endless before them, full of promise. The drought would end someday, the seasons would turn, and life would keep demanding courage from them both, but they'd face it together. And though no words were spoken for a long while, Clara knew the truth, he had chosen her, completely. The world, vast and wild, finally felt like forever.